Welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast, authentic chat about medicines, pharmacy and healthcare in the UK.
Pharmacists Jamie, Gimmo and STC take on topical and controversial stories, but keep it edgy yet light-hearted.
Guests share their career-defining drug, song and book, and also share their joyful patient stories. Welcome to the Oral Apothecary Podcast. My name is Jamie Hayes. For this episode, we're joined by Dr. Esther Clift. Esther is a physiotherapist and a consultant practitioner in acute frailty based on the Isle of Wight. We will welcome Esther in a moment as she shares a drug for our formulary, her career anthem, and recommends a book for the Oral Apothecary Library. Our micro-discussion this week will be informed by a publication from the British Geriatric Society, Joining the Dots, a blueprint for preventing and managing frailty in older people. We love a blueprint. But first, let me welcome my two fellow apothecaries. Now, one has committed pedultery this week, and one, in a moment of madness, has put himself forward for election. STC is in Bournemouth, and Gimmo is in Cardiff. Tell me more.
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, vote for me if you live in Wales, and you're a pharmacist, and you're a member of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. Then lend me your vote. I think it goes live on May the 10th. I've done it before. It's been a while. So, yeah, I don't really want to say much more other than you've done it before as well, haven't you, Jamie? So,
your record speaks for itself, Gimmo.
That's what I said. That was my excuse for not doing any active campaigning.
Ooh. And what did I say on the WhatsApp group? Do you remember how good Nokia were?
Yeah, well.
I'm only joking. Hey, well done, though. It's, we can say all we like about people taking positions of leadership, but if people don't do it, then we don't have people. So fair play to both of you. I know you've both done it before, so yeah. Good luck.
It takes a huge amount of courage to put yourself forward. So well done, Gimmo. And a couple of people have been in touch with me from around England and just to get some sort of sounding board. So yeah, a lot of courage. So well done to everybody.
Cheers.
You've got a good mouthpiece here. Although it's not a pharmacy podcast.
We've got to stay professional.
So by deduction, you're the pedulterer then, STC.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So yes, I was invited onto Pharmacist Diaries. If you've not caught it, available on all podcast platforms. Anisha Patel, she's been running for longer than we have, and it really is, I think, probably fair to describe it as a pharmacist podcast as opposed to ours being a medicines podcast. But it was great fun, and she really asks people to come on and talk about their career as a pharmacist. And so, yeah, check it out if you would like to have a listen. And yeah, it's on Pharmacist Diaries.
I listened, and I don't think I've heard the heparin story before.
Oh, okay.
So that deserves, not for now, but that certainly deserves its
another
time.
Desert Island drug, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It deserves its time on a successful podcast. So
yes. So
I haven't listened, Steve, and I hear enough of you and read enough WhatsApp messages. No, well done. I think there was a lovely picture of you dressed up as a superhero on the YouTube thing, and I think you passed on your 8 tips for developing your career. So I think it's good to pass on the wisdom to the younger pharmacists, isn't it?
Yes, I fell right into the advice trap that Jamie always tells me to avoid.
Advises you to avoid.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, I suppose it was knowledge is our superpower, is really what I was saying. If you want to be a medicines expert, then knowledge is your superpower.
Very good. Look, last week we had Professor Don Berwick in Cardiff at a Bevan Commission event talking about waste in healthcare. He was highlighting the Institute of Healthcare work from 2023 on breaking the rules for better care. He mentioned Prof. John Seddon's work on failure demand, which we sort of touch on fairly frequently. Here's the question. How many rules do we currently have in place that were likely created with the best of intentions but don't benefit patients, families, or our people? If you could break any rule in service of a better experience of patients and or staff, what would it be? So that piece of work that IHI have already got well underway, and I believe the Bevan Commission in Wales are starting hot on the tails of it. Now, the question you're all waiting for, I did present Sir Don with a handcrafted invitation on my finest stationery with my finest fountain pen for the pod. Now, I haven't heard anything yet. I keep checking my emails, but no reply.
Well, I suspect it will come in a weighted paper that was even heavier than yours, in a gold leaf envelope, written with a even more expensive fountain pen than the one that you own.
I was up around 110 gram for my paper.
Oh, that's
okay.
Impressive.
It's nearly card.
Yeah, maybe he was put off by it.
He's
You know,
such a
like-
class act that he's going to reply either way. Let's move on. It's our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Esther Clift. Clinically, Esther is leading an acute frailty team in an emergent department supporting older people with acute decompensation of frailty to return home for treatment and recovery using a home-first strategy. She is one of NHS England's National Specialty Advisors for Urgent and Emergency Care and a Senior Lecturer at Winchester University. Esther is Chair of the Nurses and Allied Healthcare Professionals Committee within the British Geriatric Society. Welcome to the pod, Esther.
Thank you, Jamie and Gimo and STC. It's really great to be here with you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, good to see you again, Esther. We met in Edinburgh, didn't we, when I was there last May at the British Geriatric Society?
Yeah, indeed. We had a very lovely meal out with some pharmacists, some medics, and enjoyed an Italian meal and lots of top banter, as my children would say, which was very entertaining, but also putting the world to rights, I think. And we found some shared common ground, didn't we, in our sort of personalised approach and our deprescribing desires. So it was really good to connect.
It was a multi-disciplinary meal, if ever there was one.
Indeed it was. Indeed it was. Indeed. Yeah.
And so that's when we met, obviously, I said to the guys, we haven't had a physio on yet, which is very remiss of us. So I said, we must get Esther Clift on. She's ledge. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do then, because you've got quite an unusual role, haven't you?
Yeah, and I've got a fantastic portfolio career, I like to call it now, which is really glorious. So I'm taking on the mantle of setting up an acute frailty service. I've only been in post now for 3 months. So when we met last year, I was running a virtual ward. Absolutely fantastic, superb model, best care that we can offer for patients.
In the New Forest?
In the New Forest, yeah. And they continue to manage a really excellent service. And actually, the Northern team won the Skills for Health award for innovation last night as they put their point of care testing model, I guess, up for that. So really kind of innovating, doing things, definitely improving the care for people living with frailty. So an absolutely fantastic team. But I kind of embraced the mantle of heading back into an emergency department and trying to see if we could look at the front door frailty service and review how we're supporting people to try and get them home as quickly as possible, avoiding unnecessary admissions. The island feels like a kind of petri dish of frailty, if you like. It's a contained population. It expands during the summer, but it's a moderate population. And I think in terms of trialling some of the opportunities for managing frailty differently, it felt like a kind of opportunity to see what we could do. And as a physiotherapist...
This is the Isle of Wight, isn't it?
The Isle of Wight. This is the Isle of Wight, indeed.
A petri dish of frailty.
Yeah, write that down.
I've written it down.
So when you said you're at the front door, are you at the front door or are you in people's homes? I'm trying to sort of work out in terms of... So one of the things I've been involved in, lightly, but is we call it the navigation hub, but really one of the things it does is it looks at the 999 calls coming in, particularly from care homes and other places, to see whether those people can be dealt with in another way other than admitting them to A&E. And so, so there's alternative setups such as, actually, we've looked at this and you don't need to come in. And that's things like CT scans for falls and stuff like that. Like, do they actually have to be blue lighted in for a CT scan? And so I just wondered, are you at the front door as in people are coming in and you're sending them home, or are you stopping them going on to the ambulance in the first place?
So at the moment, it's embryonic and I am at the front door. But we are
with open
aspirational. Possibly.
Virtually.
Also trying to push people back out. No, really, physically, I'm in the emergency department and picking up people as they're coming in. We've been really good at identifying frailty at the front door, as was the Sequin for the last couple of years. But actually, up till now, it hasn't. Nobody's done anything about it. It doesn't really matter what your frailty score is. We've done it, end of. But we are now, our team is stepping in at that point and seeing, is there anything that we could do about alternative stuff? And partly, it's that actually knowing what's out there, isn't it? It's knowing what the alternatives might be, and then trying to help join those things together, so to synthesize those possibilities. But the beautiful thing about the Isle of Wight is that we've got an integrated acute trust and the ambulance service. So we've got the phones and the stacks and all of those things in the same space. So there's no reason at all why we can't move into having those alternative conversations quite quickly. I've only been in a couple of months, but we've got all of those aspirations. And again, looking at the national picture, what's working well, who's doing what well, is really a good way to see where we need to go next in terms of developing some of those things.
Esther, is it fair to say then, if you can't do it on the Isle of Wight, then you're not going to be able to do it anywhere, kind of thing?
That's kind of my feeling. STC. I think we've got the possibility of some really good integrated working, and we've got some great groups of people, I guess, who are really passionate about island life, who want to make it as good as possible. And we've only got 3 PCNs, that we can work with really closely. So I'm at the very beginning of seeing what we can do, but I'm really excited about the possibility. And we know that for people living with frailty, hospitals are not good places for any length of time. They're absolutely critical for a short intervention, but actually they're really not the best place. And one of the things that we have really got going for us on the island, I think, is that we've got one of the most responsive and receptive palliative care teams, I think, who are really fantastic. Now, that's obviously at the very end of the line for people living with frailty, but it does give some reassurance in terms of how things might happen at the very end.
Esther, along those lines, can you tell us a bit more about what you see with decompensation and what you've seen over the last 3 or 4 years with that then?
So, the conditions in some ways are still the same as I think they've probably always been. We're talking about people who are falling over. We're talking about people who are in end-stage heart failure. We're talking about people who've got deterioration in their cognitive function, which may precipitate any or all of the above. And we've got people who are kind of struggling with some of their social and functional issues as they grow older, getting more isolated. I think if you're talking about what's changed over the last 3 or 4 years, any clinician will tell you what an absolute game changer COVID was for people's functional resilience and their ability to manage things themselves. And so we often see people who are presenting much later and maybe haven't had any interactions with healthcare for some time, so they're sicker and harder then to pull out of the chasm, if you like. But also the sort of social isolation. People have moved into very different ways of functioning socially, and when people stopped doing something, if they were on the cusp of managing their frailty, COVID just knocked them off their perch completely, and many of those people will never recompensate, if you like. And it still astonishes me, but I often have conversations with family who, when I'm going around the collateral, are saying, actually, do you know, she's never really recovered from lockdown. She was doing these things and she never really recovered. I think the worst case I saw of that was when I was on the virtual ward, and there was somebody who was completely independent. She's part of an amazing line dancing team or posse, and she used to get the bus to the various line dancing venues across the whole of the New Forest. A big patch, complicated timetables, aren't they, STC? Yeah. Nothing's fluid, but she could
once
do
a
that.
Week. They only go once a week.
Well, she could coordinate herself and get her to where she needed to be to get the various line dances. Lockdown happened. She did get COVID. She was quite sick, and I was called in to see her as part of the virtual ward as she was in the recovery phase and had come out of hospital and was back at home. And she was literally curled up fetally on her bed, and her son said, I just don't know what's happened. And clearly she'd got a cognitive impairment, but she was containing it. She'd managed it during COVID, and actually that decompensating episode just knocked her completely. She did get mobile again, but she never regained enough of her cognition to be able to get back onto the complicated timetabling of joy.
So Esther, I want, just for the listener, if you could perhaps explain then, so you are a physiotherapist, and obviously anybody listening will know that must something to do with mobility, but your role is much wider than that, isn't it? So could you just describe who else is in your team and how you came, how do physiotherapists come to lead teams that is not just about mobility?
Brilliant, Steve. Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, so in our region, in the Wessex region, we've had a really good training faculty, I guess, over many years. And in the early 2000s, there was a recognition that there was some cracking clinicians who were not medics, but who were wanting to extend and expand and maybe even maintain their clinical contact in a way that wasn't particularly possible. So it was about the time the consultant nurse roles were being discussed. And so the Wessex Deanery put together a consultant training programme for a multi-professional training programme. So it varied in its look, and actually there's a fantastic piece of research coming out of Bournemouth University looking at that particular programme and how it maps against the consultant frameworks and so on. But basically it was 3 or 4 years. We had midwives, physios, nurses, paramedics, all part of that system. And there was a lot of multi-professional learning in terms of leadership and capability in research, but also clinical exchanges, if you like. In 2015-16, there was a recognition that they needed some more people with capability to manage older people. And so 4 of us were taken on as consultant trainees. I, at that time, had been running the front door frailty, although we weren't allowed to call it that. We were far too innovative, ahead of the game at Southampton General Hospital. We were called the Older People's Outreach Team. I'd been doing that for a while, and it got to the point that I kept being promoted to lead teams and manage things, and was coming away from patient facing, and it was absolutely doing my head in because I'm a clinician and I wanted to be with patients as well, just to remind myself about why all the other stuff matters. And so this consultant program, I applied for it and was taken on for 3 years, was it? 3 years. And as part of that, started my doctoral studies and had the opportunity to rotate into a bunch of different settings that I would never have worked in previously. So I'd been managing a very multi-professional system in the ED, very familiar. I'd been managing the palliative care team. I'd been managing some of the rehab teams outside. But what I needed was some more kind of really hard clinical in lots of different spaces. So I went back up onto the MOP wards. I did my prescribing, which, physios were only able to begin to prescribe in 2013. So
paracetamol only at the time.
Indeed, it was still a very kind of early innovative space, and the course I applied for was the nurse prescribing course, and I kept saying, "Can I do that? Are you sure? I'm not a nurse." So really kind of pioneering, I guess, in terms of where we were sitting. So I went back to working on the acute medical take. I did some psychiatry because I realised that was an area I was not very experienced in as a physical health physio. I did some community geriatrics, which was absolutely game changing and kind of is where my heart still is. Did some primary care and did a whole chunk of working in care homes, looking particularly at medication reviews at that point because I was a prescriber, but looking at catheter care and urine infections and trying to work through some of those things.
So Esther, that sounds great. What's your relationship with medicines now? How do they feature for you in your working week?
Great. So I continue to use my prescribing skills, mostly about deprescribing though. And it's quite difficult to deprescribe in an emergency department because you haven't really got anything to cross off. So that involves quite a lot of conversations and suggestions back to GPs. Can we stop this? Can we try that? But the lovely thing is having the patients in front of you and a clue about what they're taking. It is also much harder in the emergency department than it is at home, because at home, as you all know, you open the cupboard and you know exactly actually what somebody's taking compared with what they're prescribed. Those are much harder conversations to have in the ED because people bring in their bags of meds potentially, but you don't really know whether they've just brought you in.
The paramedic brings it in anyway. Whether it's got everything in it, who knows?
Who knows?
Are you working with your pharmacy team then on some of these issues? Do you have a frailty pharmacist or anything like that?
We don't at the moment in the emergency department, and we don't actually in our community rapid response service. But certainly as I was leaving the virtual ward, I was beginning to work with the pharmacy team to see whether we could include them, because certainly the most successful virtual wards have pharmacists within them. The beauty of the island is that everything is really tiny and small, and the pharmacists are fantastic and
Are
available.
they tiny and small as well?
I was going to say that.
No.
So can I just, on the island, are there success stories of the petri dish? So you say that petri dish of frailty. There must have been other sort of, people treat it as a self-contained. What are the success stories generally from healthcare over the years?
So I think the kind of integration of the way that some of the community services has worked, I think I would say as a physio, I think the MSK physio service has been really well integrated. They've been real pioneers in developing the first contact physio system within primary care that has worked.
Musculoskeletal, yeah.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
thanks.
right.
The musculoskeletal teams. They've got some pioneering, I guess, in terms of extended roles and expanded roles because of some of the challenges around workforce, but also some of the capability internally. So we've got a podiatrist who's a consultant podiatrist, who's a prescriber who leads most of the diabetic foot work. I think that's really fantastic. We've got an interventional radiologist who runs the breast service, who's a radiographer, not a radiologist, sorry, a radiographer. So some really kind of pioneering role working, I think. I've already talked about, I think, our palliative care team, which is both in and out of the hospital, is really exemplary. I think we don't shout in it. Kind of the bottom end of the country, we don't really shout enough about what we're doing that's really brilliant. I think one of the best pieces of work, which I'm trying to scribble up at the moment, was getting 2 associate practitioners to join the team looking at reducing chemical restraint for people with dementia in the hospital. And they've seen a massive reduction in the prescriptions for people with dementia by having 2 people who are around in core hours, who are, you just call them and they'll pitch up and come and work out what else they can do, other ways of communicating. They've got a bit of time to sit with somebody to find out what goes on, to call family, and to negotiate how somebody can be better managed at home. So I think that there's some great stuff, Jamie, but I think we keep it under a bushel generally.
The Oral Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and OneLessPill.com.
So, Esther, now then, here's a challenge for you, which I'm sure you'll be able to rise to. So all guests get to give us 3 things. I'm sure you know this. The first is a desert island drug. So what would you like to give us?
Do you know, I thought long and hard about this, and I thought about most of my clinical work is really about deprescribing, and I didn't want to choose my most deprescribed drug. So I'm putting that out as actually it would be a no drug space if I was doing that. But I spent most of my early childhood in East and Central Africa. I gave birth to a child myself in East Africa, and took 2 children under the age of 2 out to East Africa. And so the only drug that I think I've probably engaged with throughout those early years that really was an absolute game changer for me was Paladrin.
Right.
So I bring you Paladrin, which is no longer licensed as an anti-malarial in the UK, but in the early 90s, mid-90s, was an absolute game changer for me. And I think we haven't talked about kind of global health and so on, but that's another thing that I've got a huge passion for, having spent much of my early life, as I say, overseas. And so I think there's something, it just reminds me that sometimes there's a drug for a time and then something better happens. Sometimes no drug is better. But I watch with delight the developments in anti-malarials, and I look forward to a day that actually, every child that's born in a malarious country has the same health outcomes as somebody who's born in this country. And it took me a long time when I came back to England to be thankful that, or to not be thankful, because I guess I was always thankful that our prescriptions are free. The drugs are always in the chemist, things which make a huge amount of difference to the amount of to the health of children, I guess, over the world. So I give you Paladrin as my drug of choice.
Very good, yeah. Otherwise known as Proguanil.
Indeed.
I was going to say, brings back memories. So anyone who's been a community pharmacist knows that sinking feeling when someone says, I'm going to a certain country, and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to work out what's the malaria regime for
Regimen.
Regimen, sorry. And I think it was the NPA guide or something, was it? It's been a while since I checked, but that was what we used to check.
You used to be able to phone up to find the latest travel information. This is before the web, and to find out that
before the web,
going,
so you had to look
if
it
you were
up.
going to East Africa, whether or not Paludrin there was a lot of resistance to Paludrin, and whether you needed to use something else. So,
And there was one that was really cheap, and there was one that was really expensive. And so people, well, anyway, sorry, I'm reminiscing.
Paludrin was cheap. But I think the other thing, sorry, just to chip in again about Paludrin, it tastes absolutely disgusting. And so actually my children from a very early age are very good pill takers. And I think as we look at actually the green agenda as well, and next week
we discussed this.
Is green AHPs. And the reason that a lot of people don't take medication is because they don't like the taste of it or they can't swallow it. And actually, my kids are all very good at swallowing, so they're not going to be responsible for the pill mountain.
There you go. We talked about this with Alison Tennant on the paediatric episode only a couple of weeks ago. And do you know the other thing I like about this is that from a physio point of view, when I do the teaching around deprescribing, we've had a couple of physios on the Wessex ALS course. And one of the first ones I remember, we were down in Plymouth, I think, no, Exeter. And when we asked about, again, desert island drugs, she picked exercise, which is, I think, what you were alluding to at the beginning, that if you'd had a choice. So, and actually, I guess the thing about, we're all interested in deprescribing as well. And so, if you got to the situation where you had a vaccination, or people were able to, and could afford to buy all the nets for the mosquito to stop the mosquito bitings, then you wouldn't need to take the drug. So we too easily go for the drug, don't we? Generally, when we could be going further up the stream and sorting out the problem. So that's a great example, I think, for a physiotherapist to pick. So thank you. You can definitely have Paludrin. The second thing then is something for the Spotify Oral Apothecary playlist. So what would you like to give us as your career anthem?
I don't think you've had it, but my anthem would be the marvellous Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive. That's after 20 years of working within the NHS. I recall
I think we have had it.
Have you? Oh, sorry.
No, you're allowed to have it.
You're allowed to have
Am
it.
I?
You're allowed to have
I
it.
recall one amazing...
Give us the story.
Amazing...
You're not allowed to say amazing, but you can have Gloria Gaynor.
Sorry. Royal College of Nursing conference as a fairly early career, my beginning to kind of get back into work after having my family. And we were showcasing what is now the Frailty Service at the front door. And we'd had a really brilliant presentation, a bunch of us as kind of band sixes, full of joy. And I was obviously the outsider as a physio at the RCN conference, but the after conference dinner involved a bit of karaoke, and this was definitely our team anthem at the time, because in spite of lots of people saying, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, we did, and we survived. And actually I would like to think that service was one of the forerunners for acute frailty work nationally, and probably us stepping up at that point to talk about how brilliant it was one of the catalysts to begin other people thinking, oh, could we do something similar? So I will definitely survive, and I hope that some of the great models of working, both front door and virtual ward, will also survive.
Very good. Jamie, I can't think who picked Gloria Gaynor. I'm so excited.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'm misremembering.
Yeah. There you go. It's a great tune anyway. They're all on Spotify. And so, if you look at the Oral Apothecary playlist, so that will fit in just beautifully, and a great story. Okay, and the third thing is a book.
My book is the lovely Being Mortal by Atul Gawande.
Hey!
I couldn't see that you'd had either, but which is absolutely fantastic. It talks about illness, medicine, and what matters in the end. And I think the thing that's most astonishing is that he is a surgeon, not a geriatrician, because he writes like a geriatrician. And the sort of personalised care theme about what matters to you, what matters to me, runs through as a golden thread. And it was a real eye-opener, I think, when I read it and thought, oh, that's what I think. That's what I think. That's how I think we should be practicing medicine. So it was a real kind of confirming that it's okay to do things in a very person-centered way, and to not be rigidly stuck to the rules as you started this conversation.
But Esther, he never replies to our emails, though.
Does he not?
No.
He did to me about 20 years ago on the Checklist Manifesto.
Yeah, and then he published a few books, and then he got big.
It's not old, that book, but it's probably 5 years now, is it? Maybe.
No,
longer than that,
isn't it?
Yeah, and so in a way, it was ahead of its time, wasn't it? And the thing that's always stuck with me in that book is some of the vivid examples that he describes of essentially keeping people alive, and the balance, and it links to what we chatted about when we talked about, what was it? You had the phrase, Steve, health span versus lifespan.
Yes.
And so it's an idea that's come really into fashion lately, isn't it? Is what's more important is like quantity of life or quality of life. So no, that's a great book. I might actually read that again. It's been a while.
Yeah, 2014 it was first published. So yeah, 10 years.
You don't know this, Esther, but there's a reason why I knew that I liked you and that we would get on when I met you. Because guess what my book that was first allowed into the Oral Apothecary Library? It was that very book.
Was it? Gosh, I obviously didn't go back into the archives far enough, did I?
No.
I can't remember if it was my choice. One of mine was Checklist Manifesto. So his other book.
Yes, Atul Gawande does feature twice. That's right. Both Paul and I both picked an Atul Gawande book. So you've got no pushback from me. A phenomenal book. And I actually recommend everybody I ever come across who's working in health or otherwise to read it. And some of the things that I guess we're probably going to go on to talk about now, again, in relation to frailty, is the Lucy Pollock book, which, as you might probably know, we've had Dr. Lucy Pollock on here. Again, a favourite episode on the Oral Apothecary. So, yeah, thank you very much for your three choices.
Fabulous.
Very good. And micro discussion next, looking at an article from the British Geriatric Society, Joining the Dots, a blueprint for preventing and managing frailty in older people. I'd ask you what you make of it, Esther, but carefully noting that you were one of the contributors. So
it's not just thrown together, this podcast. I picked this on purpose.
Thank you for picking it, because I think although it was published a couple of years ago, there's still masses of content within it. And I think it was, again, we've talked about things being ahead of their time, but Professor Hendry is articulate and very policy savvy. So she was part of the health policy in Scotland for many years, and so she knows what makes people tick, I guess, when you're trying to look at compelling people to a better way of working from a policy perspective. And so it kind of combines the policy aspirations with the practical capability that clinicians can deliver. And the group consulted really, really widely. And I think that is what makes it so useful, that it's clearly multi-professional but multifaceted. So there's the possibility of anyone getting hold of it and thinking, actually, which bit do we want to pick off? How do we want to make this work in our system? What do we want to do? And, having 12 very basic recommendations at the beginning we've talked about leadership, actually, having leadership that recognises a vision for healthy ageing. It's not rocket science, but actually it will make a massive difference to everybody if that really is enacted in every health system. And, we find ourselves in a health system at the moment, certainly in England, where, NHS England has merged with Health Education England. They've seen 40% cuts in their leadership roles. Our local integrated care system is seeing massive challenges around the way that they're working. And actually, because older people is always the Cinderella service, kind of at the bottom of the line, it's really easy almost to disregard the need for older people's leadership, championing those quiet voices who they may be quiet, but actually we know that they're really high service users, and often for all the wrong reasons. And so to be able to be really clear that we need leadership, we need to know who's managing which bit. We need system-wide programs, because actually a silo is never going to sort out anything for older people. So it's really not rocket science, but to have articulated really carefully, and then to point people to where those resources are available to be able to kind of log into them.
So Esther, just for the non-health professional listener, could you describe what you mean by frailty in maybe one sentence?
Great. So we talk about frailty as a long-term condition, which is described by a loss of a physiological reserve. So somebody who is not robust and is likely to have a single insult is going to cause a catastrophic deterioration in their function. And that may be a physiological insult, like an infection, or a functional insult, a change of environment, change of medication. Any of those things can have really big impact on people with frailty. And we're really good at measuring it. What we're less good at is actually noticing it and then doing something about it. Because if we can intervene differently for people that we know we're living with frailty, we can do things much better. When I first started work, we just used to cohort people in chronology. And actually, we know that chronology is a very poor indicator of somebody's ability to respond, or their longevity even, i.e. how much longer they've got left, or the quality of the life they've got left.
One thing is I find myself wondering is, do we need a different word than frailty just because it has other connotations? That's not a question as such. It's just a thought.
It's a bit like heart failure that we talked about in the last episode, wasn't it?
It is. I was reading this document and I was trying to think, how can we? It's massive. The document itself isn't massive, but the things it's describing are big, aren't they? And I came to the conclusion that, what we need is a national frailty service. Or something like that,
National Care Service.
The reason we don't like the term frailty, and the reason it evolved in a time when frailty was quite rare because people didn't live that long, and so even to achieve the state of frailty was probably an achievement, whereas now it's very common, and it describes it. So again, it links to that conversation before, doesn't it, about there needs to be a shift change in how we deliver care. And in a way, this document it's great, but it's not explicit enough about that. Is what it's describing is a new way of delivering healthcare, and that's what we've got to move into. And maybe that's the National Care Service or the National Frailty Service.
But it dovetails, doesn't it? I think this came out before. We've previously discussed the Chief Medical Officer for England, Chris Whitty's document, which came out in November 23. I believe this came out in March 23. So I think that you're going to get some traction because it's on his radar. And the point being, and we've discussed this before, so there are plenty of old and very old people who are very active and don't need these things, but when they become very old and or frail, we have to design the service around that type of person, and this is the point that it's trying to make, isn't it?
And it's not designed at the moment, is it?
No, it isn't. And so geriatrics, like we were saying about pediatrics, okay, they're the two sort of they're the two generalists left, really. And what my experience of geriatrics, and we've had Dr. Mark Holland on here, who you might remember, fantastic episode. I learned so much from him. He was a geriatrician. I worked with him on the acute medical unit for many years, and others that worked there. And what they are brilliant at is what they like to call interdisciplinary rather than multidisciplinary, which is why, let's be honest, as you've nicely articulated, why somebody who is a physio by background is actually a frailty consultant. And we have a nurse one in Dorset as well. And so it actually trusts and respects that other people can have the necessary skill set to be able to do it. And that's what I love about geriatrics and all the great stuff that Lucy Pollock talks about. But they totally get that it's an interdisciplinary thing that we need. And the medicines, and the big part, obviously, we're interested in this in the document is, you need proper structured medication review. And it's very clear, doesn't it? It says that if you've got a certain level of frailty, that's what you should be having. It's not the only thing that you need, of course, but it's absolutely fundamental to a comprehensive geriatric assessment. So, we of course would applaud it, but as Gimmo's saying, it's how do you move it forward is the leadership bit, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is that interdisciplinary. So knowing that we need each other, that one person alone isn't going to sort all of it, but actually it is wrapped around the patient. And I think, that the infographics, the BGS have got a brilliant comms team and design team. And Amy's really good at finding images that really describe that. And so, her comprehensive interdisciplinary assessment and person-centered care planning on page 4, that diagram pretty much sums up what we're trying to do. And the layers we've talked in our area about, the frailty daisy, the petals of the daisy around what needs to be fixed on, and those images really matter because actually the bits start falling off, and you've got an unbalanced comprehensive. It's no longer comprehensive. Bits are missing, and therefore the patient's not benefiting from all of the other bits. But when it's a whole, it's a really strong and capable thing. But it is about the leadership and the recognition that it does really matter. Gimmo, I think your comment about frailty is well made, a comment well made. But the reality is, I believe that whatever we call older people's services, people will not like it while we live in a culture where it's unpopular to be old.
That's a fair point.
There was a brilliant editorial by a previous British Geriatric Society, I think it was the treasurer or so on, who was just saying whatever you call it, it's going to be unpopular. So geriatrics, people don't like that. It's an outdated term, but it describes what you're doing. And actually, if you need a geriatrician, you need a geriatrician, and you will be really happy that they're called a geriatrician. So we need to just kind of get over ourselves, I think.
I don't like the fact I qualify for Saga Health and Saga car insurance, so you don't have to tell me that.
Except I'd much rather be 50 than 20. So you can say that, but I'm so glad I'm not 20.
We're 53, not 23 now. So I've got one point though, Esther, and I think I'm familiar with some of this work, and I think Dr. Lucy Pollock talked about this as well. But I was surprised. So again, trying to explain to the non-health professional is that this idea of frailty is that you've got these geriatric syndromes, haven't you? And we love alliteration on the Oral Apothecary. And I'm surprised you didn't go for the 5 M's, which is medication, mind, mobility, multi-complexity, and what matters most. You went for falls, immobility, delirium, incontinence, and medicines-related harms. I would have loved a 5 M's in there personally, but what do I know?
Yeah, and I think some systems have taken on. I know on the continent, I've certainly seen the 5 M's as being a sort of framework for frailty and for older people. And I guess like everything, whatever you call it, it is a rose by any other name, You either want it or you don't want it. And actually those things are all covered in the language. But yes, I think alliterations are good if it helps us remember them and consider them.
Yeah, it might just be my learning style. Jamie, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's gone. I can see the Atul Gawande sort of influence there a little bit, I think, Esther, because of the I highlighted the what matters to older people section, which obviously resonates with us when you read through it. The case studies for me bring it to life. When you read those little vignettes, it reminds me of, the Prescript Annual Awards is being advertised at the moment, where every year we get some great examples of medicines optimization work, often in care homes and deprescribing and last year's winner was a deprescribing in a care home. And the phrase that sort of, I think, won it as well, not just for the work, but for the presentation as well, was that after the deprescribing on quite a wholesale sort of within the care home, a change of practice, somebody commented that the care home came alive again as a result of some really powerful deprescribing. And it just sent, I thought, that is the quote. And the impact that we can have. And the case study that, this is late in the pod now for my book recommendation, but I think it's all linked. See if you agree with me, Esther. The case study on page 30, Make Movement Your Mission. I really enjoyed reading that little vignette because my current read at the moment is The Miracle Pill: Why a Sedentary World is Getting It All Wrong.
Brilliant.
And it's a really nice
by?
read. It is a really nice read about, and Gimmo will love it because he's active on his
Who's
bike
it
a lot.
by?
It's by Peter Walker, former journalist, I believe.
Oh,
But it is
okay.
it's a great read about the implications of what we've got wrong as society, which must have an impact then as we go through to older age.
Absolutely. My doctoral thesis was around exercise uptake in older people. And, the reality is, so we had in our heads, I think, that older people just don't like doing exercise. And so it's kind of a lost cause. Interestingly, my research showed that often older people had been told to desist by a medical practitioner after a health crisis of some sort. So either the exercise instructor or the group said, oh, you've had a heart attack, we can't have you back. Or a GP said, don't do that anymore. Or the orthopedic surgeon said, no, you can't do. And rather than replacing it with something, actually people just stopped. And I think, after my doctoral research, I started running myself. I'm still a very slow runner, but if you look hard, you can see the medals on the wall behind me. Because I do the odd 10K, just because I realised I wasn't setting myself up. And actually that whole piece is around embedding good practice in early life. You don't suddenly become somebody living with frailty. You've been building up to that forever. So the whole life course really matters. And I think if we put more PE into school, and not just foul competitive games, but, getting people to do the things that they like doing and to keep doing the things that they like doing. I really enjoyed competitive games. I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing, but for some people that's a real turn off, and then they never get into doing any sort of activity. So finding as a youngster what will get you moving and doing it regularly, and will absolutely be a game changer for our whole health system.
The book makes the point, Esther, that it doesn't have to be exercise either, does it? It's activity of daily living and normal things, rather than sport. Whereas sport potentially has been a huge turn off for people and thinking, well, I can't. So yeah, it's a really, I would recommend it to the listener. The Miracle Pill: Why Sedentary World is Getting It All Wrong, Peter Walker. A big thank you to Esther for joining us on the Oral Apothecary, for sharing her stories, her desert island drug, her book for our library. Coming up next time, we'll be joined by Marie-Carmen Clement. Marie-Carmen specialises in improving risk communication in multiple sectors, including healthcare, environment and in the media. She currently works at Sense About Science in a project called Risk Know-How, helping communities understand the risks that affect them. Look forward to that one. Join us next time. You can contact us via Twitter at Oral Apothecary. We're on LinkedIn. Email us at oralapothecarypod@gmail.com. Many of you do, thank you. And not forgetting our website, theoralapothecary.com. Gimmo now with the final ingredient.
Can I just say, James, as well, if you are following us on a platform, make sure you sort of give us 5 stars and a review and all that sort of stuff, because it does help to sort of push them up the charts and increase the visibility. We don't normally ask for that, but we probably should ask people to do it a bit more often, because it does help. So thanks for that, Esther. That was fantastic. I think we'll come back to a lot of these themes, and what we've essentially been talking about today is like the future of healthcare. So I think it's going to be interesting. So it was a great chat. Thank you very much. I want to talk for the final ingredient. Well, I wanted to continue on the space theme I started last week. And when we talked about EpiPens in space. And according to BBC Science Focus magazine, on the 21st of February, a metre-wide space capsule landed in the Utah desert after 8 months in orbit. Its cargo was a batch of ritonavir, an antiviral drug used in the treatment of HIV and COVID, I think. So the ritonavir had been manufactured in space on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. And it proved what VARDA Space Industries have been hoping for, that medicines could in fact be manufactured in space. But why go to all the trouble? Well, it turns out that microgravity conditions cause many of the processes used to build complex crystal molecules, such as proteins and antibodies used in many medicines, to behave differently from how they do on Earth. So, for instance, the liquid solutions from which crystals form don't separate according to density. Solids don't naturally fall or rise with them. The lack of gravity means that any structures that grow, crystal structures, don't warp out of shape and change their nature. So the evidence suggests that crystals grown in a microgravity environment have an 80% better chance of being superior to their terrestrial counterparts. So there is actually a UK-based firm looking at this, space firm, and they say that microgravity enhances crystallization, so you get a more perfect and similar crystals. And so they're used to mimic the protein receptors that allows us to test these drugs. So it's a fantastic area. The crystals manufactured in space are going to be used back on Earth to test new drugs. But we're not there yet. It's no surprise that this is costly. The initial run cost around $12 million, but there are plans already to build larger and more economical space laboratories. So there we have it. Drugs in space, the final pharmaceutical frontier.
You have been listening to a 3 Apothecaries production. Sound engineer Jimbo Slough, original music Jamie Brewster, artwork by David Baker and Jacob Howard.
Thanks for listening to the Oral Apothecary podcast. Do not stop listening, except on your doctor's advice.
This episode of the Oral Apothecary is sponsored by onelesspill.com, a medicines optimization consultancy.